I think basically there's an inherent risk when we go online to share any data, and be that personal data or commercially sensitive information. Um, it's probably fair to say that some of the more established online conferencing services will probably provide a greater degree of security or built-in security than some of the newcomers. Um, but ultimately, regardless of what application or system we use to share data, um, the great degree of responsibility relies upon the user of the technology and the care they take when using those services. So that's probably the weak link in the chain, is the user as opposed to the technology itself.
And the weak link in the chain, in the sense that we have rushed headlong to embrace this kind of virtual technology so that we can continue to work, many of us from home in the way that I am now, without perhaps, understandably of course, being aware of the weaknesses at the kind of human end rather than the technology end. So if that's the case, what can we do as individuals, now we're working from home, to make sure that we don't do something, and I don't mean this in a kind of pejorative way, that we don't unintentionally do something stupid as users of this new tech?
I think for new users and for those with perhaps, in the politest way, a sort of more limited understanding of IT, I always try and say, think of the real world situation. So in this instance, my advice to newcomers would be, for example, think that you're going to be hosting a meeting in your own home and you will be inviting people into that meeting. And what would you do if that was the case? So clearly you would, first of all, know who you're inviting. You wouldn't want to be inviting any strangers into your house. You would check when they arrive that they were the person you were expecting. And again, you haven't got any pretenders coming in. Um, Once you got your gathering in place, you would probably lock the front door to make sure nobody could come in whilst you were having your meeting and you were otherwise engaged. Um, and again, you would do things like, would you leave personal information lying about? So if you've got a meeting at your dining room table, you are probably not going to leave your bank statements and other personal information lying there. You would want to put things out of the way before the meeting started. So you've got a clean environment and the people attending your meeting are only going to actually see what you want them to see. Now, if you can relate that real world scenario into the online world, I would suggest you've got a good basis for security. So know who's coming to the meeting, who you want to let in, check their credentials to make sure that they are the right people, clear the room of anything you don't want to be shown to anybody else. And finally, once the meeting has concluded, you would lock the front door after they've all left. So just make sure everything's turned off and you're ready to begin your business again. So following those sort of basic principles would be, in my opinion, a real good start for any new ones to this service.
All very good advice, and presumably, you're not going to leave it lying around on your kitchen table. But by that, the analogy is that you wouldn't leave a window open, a Word document open before you were about to share the contents of your
Exactly.
desktop. I'm sharing my MacBook Pro top with you right now, and there we are, the top secret code to my hidden secret stash, my Swiss bank account.
Absolutely, indeed, and I do fully understand that for newcomers to this technology, there will be a nervousness about whether the actual technical side of it's going to work. So quite often that can take the focus of somebody. So they are more concentrating on the actual mechanics of delivering an online conference than they are the basic housekeeping rules of making sure that they are not sharing anything that they do not wish to be visible. I would actually go one step further on that, and it's a great example now looking at you, and undoubtedly you're looking at me, is not also what's on your screen, but what might be in the picture behind you. So again, and nothing, rest assured, nothing that I can see that leaps out as untoward.
Yeah, you've
But
got me worried. I think there's a picture of younger children, some work pictures on the top shelf. Yeah, but of course, that personal data, the fact that you've got children, the fact that here's something that could presumably identify me to somebody with malicious intent.
Exactly, and I really don't want to go along the line of giving people nightmares and coming off scenarios that would cause people to literally unplug their computers right now. But on a personal note and a professional note, we've certainly got experiences of cyber criminals using any information that they can glean about an individual to then conduct social engineering attacks on them. So anything such as personal photos, um, pieces of paper that give information can be used. So again, it's just a case of thinking a little bit wider, um, taking a deep breath and checking instead of just rushing quickly into something without taking some real basic precautions.
But you would say, would you, Damien, that on balance, the facility that Zoom and Skype and others offer us is on balance better if one manages the risks than not using them at all because of one's fear of those risks?
Absolutely. I mean, at the moment, we are in quite clearly an unprecedented global crisis, the likes of which none of us have ever seen before. And it does call for some innovative and unusual working methods. And the situation at the moment for a lot of companies, particularly the small and medium-sized ones, is they are being faced with a choice of facilitate this new working process of basing your employees at home or closing down your operations completely. So it's a very difficult situation, and it's a case of weighing up the business needs of the organisation against the security implications of what they might be required to do from home. So some risk assessments need to be made and some risk-based decisions. But ultimately, in the greater scheme of things, it's quite clear at the moment that these um, online conferencing services are literally the lifeline of businesses, enabling them to keep working and keep their employees being paid at this time.
Yeah, really good point. And who would want to sort of cut that lifeline when so many businesses, as you say, are facing an existential threat? Can I just turn briefly and specifically to Zoom, clearly being embraced by the British Prime Minister Boris Johnson, a picture of him talking to remote cabinet colleagues from the Cobra briefing room at number 10 Downing Street using Zoom. And yet, at the same time, the Ministry of Defence instructing its employees not to use Zoom specifically until the security risks have been properly considered. Is it simply that the Ministry of Defence is a much more, if you like, risk-averse organisation than a humble business like ACM Training, for example, that it has genuine enemies, state-sponsored hackers, for example, and therefore has to be especially careful in a way that the rest of us, as you say, those small and medium enterprises perhaps need to worry less about?
Yes, I think you've hit the nail on the head there. It is simply a case of examining and assessing the assets that you wish to share in a conference. So be that audio, video, or files and data. Assessing the value of those to competitors or any other entities out there, and then making a decision on whether the risk of losing that data is outweighed by the consequences of not being able to have the conference in the first place. I would sincerely like to believe that the government and the government advisors will be very conscious of the information that the Prime Minister is sharing on any online facility, particularly when the name or that product is being advertised worldwide. And clearly the MOD will have their own systems for sharing and making sure that their data and then their conferences are as secure as they can make them. But yes, the reality is the information that you and that you may wish to share likely to be of value to state-sponsored criminals? Potentially not. However, for any organisation, they should really have a risk assessment on what they're prepared to do, what they plan to do, and the risks of losing that or some form of compromise, what the risks are of that happening, and then make that decision moving forward. It obviously doesn't prevent the fallout from accidental loss of data. As you say there, if you shared a screen or something was spotted in the background that you hadn't planned to be seen. And it also doesn't sort of cover any random eavesdropper, or as they call them, a swift kiddie who's literally just out with a big fishing net to see what they can catch coming across something. But in the scheme of things, the threat and the risk for small businesses is potentially substantially lower, of course, than it would be for any governments at this time.
Yeah. Um, just one or two final thoughts, perhaps slightly aside from cybersecurity. I noticed that this connection is a little bit unstable. I get a note on my screen now and again to say your internet connection is unstable. And I guess we're recording this around about 8 o'clock in the morning, as everybody's getting up and working from home. Is that a temporary problem? Is that the inevitable consequence of everybody gobbling up, I think, what you guys call bandwidth? In the weeks and months to come, will it become more stable? Will the internet service providers, will the built infrastructure, if you like, of the internet become more stable and more able to cope with these surges?
Yeah, that's a really good point, Richard, because clearly there's been a huge increase in demand for broadband bandwidth over the past 2 or 3 weeks now. And there has been some fairly honest, open comments from the providers themselves. I know Netflix have come back to say that they've actually reduced the streaming quality of some of their services in order to free up bandwidth, while some of the other providers are quite publicly stating at this time that they do not have any issues, and there is enough to go around, so to speak. But I do think as these things happen, yes, a quick sudden upsurge at the beginning, and then things should settle down normally. So on a personal note, we're not seeing any major consequences of it here, but it is something we are monitoring, and clearly if it's a situation that is causing businesses problems, then that is something that will probably have to be looked into, and other methods used to try and facilitate this type of work, because invariably at the moment, from all the information we're seeing, there is some time to go yet for people to be working from home.
A specific question, Damian, if I can, about recording and storing a meeting. I'm recording this meeting with you right now to share later, and I'm recording the files locally to my computer, but of course Zoom and others offer you the facility to save and record those to the cloud. Of course, the cloud is that kind of esoteric thing. We're not quite sure where it is. Is it above us? Is it above another country? In a sense, within another legal jurisdiction. Are there any concerns about the kind of out-of-the-box settings where you just go, oh, it's simple, they've got loads of storage in the cloud, that's where I'm going to save it, and then you find out later that actually it can be used in a way that you hadn't anticipated by another jurisdiction where GDPR niceties are perhaps a little different?
Yes, absolutely. And I think this comes really back to basics. If you are not used to this type of technology, and this is something you're now looking at for the first time, you really do have to start with the basics. And the basics are: read the instructions. If you're setting up this type of system, study the online guidance and set up information carefully. Probably as important is work within your own capabilities, and don't be embarrassed to ask for help. There will be a lot of people in a similar position at the moment who are faced with this for the first time, and yes, it can look quite challenging to set up some of these technologies to make them work. Maybe you can make them work out the box, but making them work securely may require a few extra steps to give you that peace of mind. And certainly from an organisation point of view, yes, you do need to look at the fine print to see where the provider of the service is telling you that they're storing their data. Is it within the EU, and does it comply with GDPR data protection requirements? Or is it a cheap and cheerful service that you've stumbled across online, where your data could now be residing in a data center on the side of a mountain on the other side of the world, and you're none the wiser? So you do need to take care. And again, with everything going on at the moment, it would be a real shame and horrible for organisations if they've tried to do the right thing and ultimately they run into problems in terms of information and protection of data, because they haven't just taken that last step of checking all the terms and conditions and ensuring that their data the data of their staff and the data of their clients is being looked after and protected in accordance with current UK and European GDPR requirements.
Damian, you've been very generous with your time and knowledge, so thank you for that. One final question. I guess there are physical security concerns that perhaps in some respects may be greater than the cyber security concerns that, you know, in just a week or two, tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands, potentially millions of laptops and PCs have been unplugged from offices and taken to many thousands, millions of individual places of work, our homes, our studies, our bedrooms, and so on, our kitchen tables. And that physical risk, I guess, is something that we need to be recognizing, as well as the kind of slightly woollier for many of us kind of difficult to grasp notions of cyber risk.
Yeah, yes, it's very true. I mean, the risks have always been there, and we have dealt with on a regular basis incidents of data loss or equipment loss through criminal activity, or quite often through just user inability to look after their own equipment. And we're now in a situation where that has been multiplied, you know, countless times because of the number of devices being taken home. And there are a substantial number of, again, basic steps that can be taken to mitigate and minimize the risks to losing equipment and data. You know, in terms of making sure that hardware is encrypted. So if a laptop is encrypted and requires a password to even get past the logon screen, if that inadvertently is left on a car seat while somebody pops into the shop, or while somebody's filling up at the petrol station and it gets stolen, or it just gets left. I know there's not much public travel at the moment, but if somebody leaves their laptop on a train, at least it's got some protection from being accessed. In terms of working from home, we sort of break things down into three areas really. There's the safety of the data itself, so you know, using encrypted drives, encrypted USB. You go back to the previous answer, make sure if you're using cloud storage, you fully understand where that cloud storage is being used. Don't let your employees use their laptops for business and personal use. You know, the situation whereby maybe mum or dad are using the laptop in the daytime for some sensitive business use, and in the evening the children are using it to download games and play games, and potentially download all sorts of malware and other dodgy software that may conflict and cause problems. Network security is another big one, with people working from home now and not having the facilities to be a bit more secure. So consider two-factor authentication where they're logging into systems. Make sure the home Wi-Fi is protected adequately, and other such steps like that. So there are basic steps that can be taken to give the users, whilst not 100% protection, because I don't think we can say that, but certainly make themselves a much harder target. And in this day and age, there are so many easy targets about, they are probably the ones that the criminals will look at first.
Yeah, what we don't want to do, as we obsess quite understandably about coronavirus, is to unintentionally let another kind of virus into our lives, and then suffer the different consequences of that. Damian Walton at Interforensics, thank you very much for your time. Some fascinating insight and some really useful advice about how we can all enjoy, I think that's the right word, safely the experience of working from home. I know you've got a busy day ahead of you, so I'll let you go. Thank you.